All right, hello everybody. I know it's been a minute since I've done one of these, but a brother had been going through some things in his life. There have been some things that have shifted in me, some things that I was dealing with spiritually, and I think it's because I had actually been speaking truth to power about my family. And I realized that I left off on some very deep things that were going on in my family, and I'm gonna get back to them. But I believe that spirit is kind of moving me in a way to talk about a topic that most of us don't get into, and it's called trauma bonding, right? And regardless of how many of us know it or do not know it, we are in consistent levels of trauma. Most of us don't acknowledge it, most of us don't understand it. And I'm gonna try to break it down a little bit in my case, right? So if you see all the other previous clips that I had done, they basically speak to a reality of generations of people who are hurt, who hurt other people, and it rolls into more hurt, right? So I want to go from that standpoint, and then now we're going to take it away from my family, and we're going to talk about my trauma bonding that I've had. Literally, for I would say I had a level of fight or flight since I was 5 years old. I had a play mama tell me that. She said, Gabriel, you have been in a state of fight or flight since you were five. And that goes into some abuse and neglect that I'm not really ready to talk about right now. I will get there one day, but I think that, for the sake of the argument, we'll talk about what probably led to a neglect issue. So I want to talk about my mother, and I want to talk about a woman who got married and she shouldn't have. She should have basically, if she wanted a child, go get a child, but don't, hurt other people in the process of you doing it. And the way that that relates to me is she had a toxic mother. So when my mother died, I was raised by her toxic mother. There are two differences in between my mother and my grandmother, and one is that my mother was very loving, very caring. She was really there emotionally for her children. My grandmother is a woman who's still alive today, who was emotionally distant from her children. And then what you start to realize is when you have an emotionally distant parent, if I'm not loving you, it's clearly because I don't love me. And it's coming from some things that I had to go through, right? So, giving a little context to my grandmother, she was the golden child of the family. She was the golden child. My mother was the golden child of the family as well. And then when you get into myself and my two sisters, I was the golden child of that. Even if you were to break down the relationship between my brothers and me, I'm still the golden child in that relationship. That's on my father's side. But where we kind of get into a situation is jealousy of my grandmother. See, the thing is, people had diminished and put down my grandmother since she was a child. She was well spoken. She was educated. She was a dancer. She used to love to dance. She played basketball. Anything you could think about, my grandmother shined at what she did. The problem is that when you shine too much, there's always going to be a group of people who are insecure that have to drag you down and let you understand you are no better than the rest of us, even though in reality you are better than the rest of them. So my grandmother, as opposed to her seeing that as a problematic situation, she passed it down to her children. My mother, it stopped with her because she didn't pass that down to us. My mother made sure that, I knew I was handsome as a child because my mother let me know that. I was hugged on at night, read bed stories to at night, loved on by my mother daily because that's just the kind of woman that she was. That was not the woman that raised her to be who she was. And what I started to realize was that my grandfather, he's also gone now. He's on the other side. And I miss him because I believe that my mother learned her affection from her father, my grandfather. She learned it from him because my grandfather was always loving. He never had a bad thing to say about anybody. And if he did, he was joking. He was a jokester about it. And I think that's why I come from a family that's full of people who we joke from time to time. Those of us who we all right in the mind, we joke from time to time. But I had to realize I'm living in my grandmother's trauma. My grandmother's trauma most likely led to her husband leaving her. My grandma's trauma led to the fact that her own children have traumatic things that are in their lives right now that they have never fixed. My grandmother's trauma led to her grandchildren living in the same patterns as her children and then living in the same patterns that they lived in as well. So I was emotionally neglected as a child. Very much so emotionally neglected. I had to raise myself. And when a person has to take on that responsibility, especially a child, when you take on that responsibility, you're getting rid of childish things. You don't have time to cry. You don't have time to ask people for things. You almost become superhuman. In fact, you do become superhuman. And you become superhuman before you could even understand that there are things that you have to learn about yourself before you could do anything else. So for me at 34 years old, actually when it started, when I was going through my healing process, 32, that I had to learn for myself that I have to unlearn some things and I have to learn some things. I have been an adult since I was 7 years old. Certain things that people used to cry over, I was like, why the fuck y'all crying over that? Because I've been through way worse. But the thing is, those people could cry because they had the emotional availability to do it. And I didn't. You know, I'm becoming more emotionally available now to other people. Not saying that I was a bad person, because I could always be good to people. I'm always good to people. But what I was emotionally unavailable for with myself was the ability to cry, the ability to really feel things. Not this fight or flight type thing that was going on in my life, because I had come from a system in my family that had made me give up those feelings, you know? So I'm better now. I had to address that, because if I didn't address it, then it would have continued to address me. And I think that that's what we talk about with trauma bonding, because it's almost a form of Stockholm Syndrome. And when we talk about Stockholm Syndrome, it is the understanding that my captive has made me understand and love my captive. You know, I'm looking past the bullshit of my captive. And I am learning to give them more appreciation than I should be giving myself. And that's exactly what I ended up doing with my grandmother. This was a form of Stockholm Syndrome. My grandmother felt levels of jealousy towards me as I was ascending as a child. Like, I could go back to the first time that I started acting, or the first time I started singing. And I remember my grandmother loving to tell people I was in all these organizations because it made her look good. It wasn't her really validating me. I had to fight to get into those things, okay? I could remember being in choir at school and things like that, and my grandmother using that as something that made her look good, like she was the good parent. Hell, I'll even take it to a further extent and talk about college. So, and then I'll say this about college, and then there'll be another clip about college, because this whole week I'm just going to talk about trauma bonding and this toxic relationship with my grandmother. But when I was applying to college, I always knew I wanted to go to a historically black college. I didn't want to go to anything else. It was a couple of HBCUs I had on my mind. So Howard was a school that I wanted to go to. Dillard in New Orleans is a school that I wanted to go to. Morehouse, of course, my dream school that I got into, I wanted to go there. I had about 4 or 5 offers to go to college. 3 of them being HBCUs, 2 of them being PWIs that I didn't even consider. My grandmother would not, pay my fees, and she wouldn't even try to get educated to want to get me to go to those schools. I basically carried the burden of educating myself on student loans, application fees, PSAT, SAT, ACT. Imagine a child having to hold down all of that. And on top of that, me coming from the state of Texas, if you know anything about our education system, we got those major tests that you got to take to go to college, and then you got state mandated tests. So I'm balancing all of that, and I was in AP. So my grandmother never helped me through that. I had to carry that weight by myself because this woman didn't want to see me thrive. I'll get into more of that in the next clip. In the meantime, everybody be blessed. Alafia, please think about, the toxic bonds that are in your life and that they didn't start likely, 5 days ago or a year or two ago, but it's something that was embedded in the way that you came into your maturation. So something to think about. Peace.